The sky above Oakhaven had been a bruised purple for days, a heavy lid pressing down on the small village nestled beside the Greywater River. Caleb Rivers knew what that meant. He'd seen it before, the slow, insidious creep of the water that swallowed roads, licked at foundations, and turned the familiar landscape into a swirling, muddy mirror of fear. Caleb wasn't like the other kids his age, most of whom spent their afternoons kicking a worn football or trading stories of distant, impossible adventures. Caleb's adventures were smaller, quieter, found in the forgotten corners of the village, the broken bicycle chains he could mend, the discarded electronics he could coax back to life, the detritus of daily life that others saw as trash, but he saw as raw material. His small workshop, tucked away in the back of his family's shed, was a testament to his peculiar genius, a symphony of wires, gears, plastic bottles, and old tires. He was 15, lean and agile, with eyes that missed nothing and hands that were rarely still. As the rain intensified, drumming a relentless rhythm on the tin roof of his shed, Caleb felt a familiar knot tightening in his stomach. The Greywater River, usually a gentle ribbon flowing through Oakhaven, was now a bloated, angry serpent, its surface churning with debris, branches, leaves, the occasional piece of someone's garden furniture. His friend, Easton, older by a year and built like he was carved from oak, ambled into the shed, wiping rain from his face. "Looks like it's going to be a bad one, Caleb," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Heard the mayor on the radio. They're telling people to evacuate low-lying areas." Caleb nodded, his gaze fixed on a distant flicker of lightning, illuminating the swollen river for a terrifying second. "Evacuate where, Easton? The roads out of here are already underwater in places. And what about Mrs. Gable, over by Miller's Creek? Her house is always the first to go. She won't leave her cats." Easton sighed, running a hand through his damp hair. "The rescue teams will come. They always do." But Caleb remembered the last major flood, 5 years ago. He remembered the agonizing wait, the limited boats, the desperate calls for help that went unanswered for hours, sometimes days. He remembered the look in Mrs. Gable's eyes when she was finally pulled from her partially submerged home, her small, trembling cat clutched to her chest, her face pale with fear and exhaustion. This time, Caleb vowed, it wouldn't be like that. Not if he could help it. By midnight, the Greywater had truly breached its banks. The rain, instead of relenting, seemed to find a new ferocity. The power flickered, then died, plunging Oakhaven into a chilling darkness punctuated only by the distant wail of wind and the deeper roar of the raging river. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and the metallic tang of impending disaster. Caleb stood at his window, watching the water rise, his mind racing. He saw homes, once anchors of familiarity, becoming islands. He pictured Mrs. Gable, alone and afraid. He knew the official rescue efforts, while valiant, would be stretched thin. They'd prioritize the most critical cases, the sick, the very young. But what about everyone else? What about those simply cut off, awaiting rescue that might come too late? Then, in the gloom, illuminated by a flash of lightning, he saw it, a large, empty plastic chemical drum, bobbing precariously in the surging current, caught briefly against a fence post before breaking free. It was a piece of trash, but in Caleb's mind, it was a lifeline. An idea, bold and improbable, sparked. Rafts. Not sleek, sophisticated rescue boats, but something crude, something built from the very refuse the floodwaters carried or revealed. Something that could reach those the official boats couldn't, or wouldn't, immediately. He spent the next hour meticulously planning, sketching designs on a damp notepad by the feeble glow of a battery-powered lantern. Principles of buoyancy, stability, and structure he'd learned from countless hours of tinkering converged. The shed, usually a haven of quiet contemplation, now pulsed with a new, urgent energy. The first rays of dawn painted a grim landscape. Oakhaven was a partial lake. Streets were gone, replaced by a swift, muddy current. The water was waist-deep in front of Caleb's house, but his shed, being on slightly higher ground, was safe for now. Caleb began to gather materials with a frantic determination. Plastic bottles, hundreds of them, rescued from discarded recycling bins before the flood hit. Old tires from the village garage. Scraps of lumber. Tarps and thick plastic sheeting. Rope. Anything that floated, anything that could be lashed together. Easton found him hours later, soaked to the bone but still surprisingly energized. "Caleb, what in the world are you doing?" he asked, looking at the growing mound of junk. "Building rafts, Easton," Caleb stated, not looking up from where he was meticulously drilling holes into the sides of 2 large plastic barrels. "We need them. People are trapped." Easton stared, then let out a disbelieving laugh. "Rafts? Out of that? Caleb, come on. This isn't some school project. This is a real flood." "Exactly," Caleb retorted, his voice sharp with focus. And real floods need real solutions. Official boats can't get everywhere, and they'll be busy. We can do something. Easton, despite his initial skepticism, had always been loyal. He watched Caleb, seeing the intensity in his friend's eyes, the practical logic beneath the seemingly absurd idea. "All right," he said, rolling up his sleeves. "What do you need me to do?" Under Caleb's precise direction, Easton became a powerful engine of labor. They emptied milk jugs, cleaned plastic containers, and scavenged for more materials. They faced immediate challenges. How to secure the bottles together. How to create a stable platform. How to stop the whole thing from capsizing the moment it hit the water. Caleb remembered an old fishing net he'd salvaged. He stretched it taut between two lengths of salvaged wood, then began stuffing the plastic bottles into the netting, creating buoyant pontoons. He knew the structure needed rigidity. The old tires, once deflated and stacked, offered surprising stability when lashed together. For the deck, he used scraps of plywood, covering them with a thick, waterproof tarp he'd found behind the hardware store. The work was grueling. Their hands were raw, their muscles ached, but the urgency of the situation fueled them. They worked in silence, punctuated only by the rhythmic splash of the rain and the increasingly loud rush of the floodwaters. News of Caleb's strange endeavor spread through the small pockets of Oakhaven not yet completely cut off. Most people dismissed it as the ramblings of a stressed, eccentric teenager. A raft made of trash? He's gone mad with the worry. But then, Skye appeared. Skye was a whirlwind of energy, a year younger than Caleb but with a natural charisma and a fierce sense of community. She had been helping her family secure their home on higher ground when she heard about Caleb. She found them in the shed, mud-splattered and exhausted, putting the finishing touches on their first raft. It was crude, undeniably, but it looked surprisingly sturdy, a rectangular platform floating on a bed of carefully bundled plastic bottles and inflated tires, all secured with ropes and salvaged straps. "Caleb, is this going to work?" Skye asked, her eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief and a glimmer of hope. Caleb pushed a damp strand of hair from his forehead. "It has to. It's stable. It's buoyant. We need to get it into the water." Skye didn't argue. She saw the quiet conviction in Caleb's eyes, the determination born of necessity. "Who are you going for first?" "Mrs. Gable," Caleb replied instantly. "Her house is closest, and she's older. I saw her roof from my window. It's barely above the water." Getting the raft, which they affectionately dubbed the Oakhaven Hope, into the water was another challenge. The current was strong. But with Easton's brute strength and Skye's unexpected knack for directing and pushing, they managed to launch it from the edge of Caleb's property, carefully navigating it through what used to be his front yard. Caleb took the paddle, a repurposed garden tool. Easton, heavier, provided ballast and a second pair of hands. Skye, despite not being asked, waded knee-deep into the water, shouting directions, her voice surprisingly clear. The journey to Mrs. Gable's house was treacherous. Debris swirled around them. Hidden obstacles lurked beneath the murky surface. The raft, though stable, was slow and required constant correction against the push of the current. Caleb's heart pounded. This wasn't just a test of his engineering, it was a test of courage. Finally, they reached Mrs. Gable's house, its porch steps swallowed, water lapping at the windows. Caleb cupped his hands and shouted, "Mrs. Gable! It's Caleb! We're here to help." A moment later, a small, pale face appeared at an upstairs window. Relief, raw and overwhelming, washed over her features as she saw the strange, makeshift raft and the two boys. "Caleb, dear boy! You came." Her voice was thin, but laced with a profound gratitude. Getting Mrs. Gable and her two terrified cats off the second-story window and onto the raft was delicate work, requiring Easton's steadying hand and Caleb's careful maneuvering of the raft. But they managed it. As they paddled back, Mrs. Gable huddled on the raft, her cats clutched tight, tears streaming down her face. "You saved us, Caleb," she whispered. "You saved us." The sight of Mrs. Gable, safe but shaken, being brought back on Caleb's junk raft, was a powerful catalyst. Word spread like wildfire, carried by Skye, who sprinted through the higher parts of the village, her voice ringing with urgency and newfound hope. "Caleb built a raft. He saved Mrs. Gable. We can save others." Skepticism started to crumble, replaced by a desperate, burgeoning hope. People began to emerge from their homes, looking at their own mountains of discarded plastic, their old tires, their broken furniture with new eyes. Could it be true? Could this young boy, with his quiet genius, have found a way? Soon, Caleb's shed became a hub of activity. More villagers arrived, some bringing materials, others offering their muscle. Skye, a natural leader, organized them. "We need more bottles over here. Someone find some sturdy poles for paddles. Has anyone seen old inner tubes?" Easton, whose initial reluctance had vanished with the success of the first rescue, worked tirelessly alongside Caleb, learning the intricate lashing techniques, understanding the principles of buoyancy. He became Caleb's right hand, helping to direct the growing crew of amateur raft builders. Under Caleb's guidance, more rafts began to take shape. Each one was a testament to Oakhaven's ingenuity and resilience. They were crude, cobbled-together vessels, but they were theirs. They were born of necessity, built from the flotsam of their own lives. A flotilla of recycled hope. The official rescue teams eventually arrived in force, their sturdy motorized boats a stark contrast to Caleb's homemade crafts. But they quickly understood the invaluable contribution of the Oakhaven Hope Flotilla. Many areas, particularly the tightly packed homes in the old part of town, were inaccessible to larger boats. Caleb's smaller, more maneuverable rafts could navigate the narrow, submerged lanes, bringing food, medicine, and critical information to stranded residents, even rescuing those in immediate danger. There were moments of genuine peril. Once, a particularly strong current threatened to capsize one of the rafts, carrying a family with a young child. Caleb, piloting his original raft, used a long pole to push against a submerged fence, diverting the runaway craft just enough for Easton to grab a rope and pull it to safety. His quick thinking, honed by countless hours of problem-solving, saved them all. Day and night blurred into a continuous struggle against the flood. The unified spirit of Oakhaven was palpable. Families cooked meals for the crews. Others filtered water. Everyone contributed what they could, their differences forgotten in the face of shared adversity. The silent, observant boy and his friends had ignited a spark that became a roaring fire of community action. Slowly, agonizingly, the floodwaters began to recede. The Greywater River, still muddy and swollen, retreated to its banks. Oakhaven emerged, battered and bruised, but resolute. The devastation was immense. Homes were ruined, livelihoods disrupted. But fewer lives were lost than in any previous flood of this magnitude. And the reason was clear. When the official recovery efforts began, Colonel Davies, head of the Regional Disaster Relief, sought out Caleb. He was a stern, experienced man, but his eyes held a profound respect. "Caleb Rivers," he said, extending a calloused hand. "Your ingenuity, your courage, and your leadership, you and your friends, you saved this village. We've never seen anything like it. A fleet of rafts, built from discarded materials. You turned trash into treasure, boy." Caleb, usually uncomfortable with praise, felt a warmth spread through him. He looked at Easton, who beamed proudly, and then at Skye, whose eyes shone with pride and an unyielding spirit. They weren't just parts of a team, they were symbols of what Oakhaven had become. The rafts, slightly damaged but still functional, were carefully hauled onto higher ground, becoming a strange, proud monument to the flood. They were a reminder of a time when despair had threatened to engulf them, but had instead been met with resourcefulness and unity. In the weeks and months that followed, Oakhaven began the colossal task of rebuilding. But something had fundamentally shifted. People looked at discarded items differently now, seeing potential where they once saw waste. The community, once fragmented by daily routines, had forged an unbreakable bond. Caleb Rivers remained Caleb, quiet and observant, still tinkering in his shed. But he was no longer just the quiet kid. He was the boy who had seen a solution where others saw only problems, who had dared to dream of rafts made of trash, and in doing so, had inspired an entire village to rise above the torrent. Easton and Skye, inseparable from him, continued to embody the spirit of collective action. The story of Oakhaven and Caleb's raft spread beyond the village, a testament to the fact that even in the darkest hours, the most extraordinary solutions can emerge from the most unexpected places. It was an inspirational tale, not just of survival, but of the boundless power of human ingenuity, resilience, and the quiet heroism of a boy who simply refused to watch his community drown. The Greywater River might rise again, but Oakhaven now knew it could rise with it, buoyed by the lessons learned, and the rafts of hope crafted from recycled dreams. That will be all for today. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification button. Goodbye.